I'm one of those Indiana University grads that actually had the opportunity to take classes under Carlson, Debbie McLean, who wrote the book on recreation in American life. And they really kind of beat on us about the profession, park and recreation as a profession, as opposed to it just being a set of easy classes to take, because it was anything but that. When I grew up, I happened to grow up in northern Indiana on the shores of Lake Michigan. So as a kid, I got to camp and swim and do all of those recreational activities. Ended up going through high school, trying to figure out for sure what it was I wanted to do. And interestingly enough, it was my dad who said, why don't you think about recreation? And I kind of was like, what's that? And he says, it's all the stuff you've all been doing, all through your life growing up. And it's a profession. It's something you might want to give a thought to. Interestingly enough, at that point, I was accepted to Indiana University, thought that looked like an interesting program, signed up to do that, and I love the profession. I love what I do. Watched a lot of kids kind of blossom from, just being very timid and almost afraid to talk to people to now they're up front and they are ready to go and love getting the opportunity to talk with people and help people have a good time. We've had a program in the past that was a kind of park and recreation, the balance in your life. And when we would talk to people, one of the things I liked to do was to talk with them about what is it that you like to do in recreation? What is it that you do in your spare time? And then what is it that you do for your work? And they're almost diametrically opposed to each other, but that was the balance that came together. And it was always fun to talk to people about that, but also it was great in community meetings or whatever to pull some of those kinds of things out and talk to people and go, that's why a quiet area is really important for people. This is why an active area is really important to people, because it helps them balance what they're doing in their daily life. So that was really good information, just to be able to work with the community and community meetings and get them to really kind of appreciate all sides of park and recreation. The ones that would become a little more difficult would be people or groups that would come in and go, well, you put a bunch of money into the golf course, but you're not doing anything for us. So we need to close that and open this. And you'd kind of go back to that issue of, wait a minute, it's serving a purpose for those people. It's not appropriate to start dishing somebody else's recreation for your benefit. It's all important, so how do we move forward with that? We're not saying that baseball's not important, but it shouldn't be at the cost of somebody else's recreation. So let's find ways to build that together. We would do ice skating expos or shows, and we started having what I called the proliferation of the flower wars. In other words, people would bring these giant things of flowers and give them to the small child who could barely skate, and then the kid next to him got nothing. And so that was kind of this ethical thing of how do you deal with that. And we ended up changing that to a point, working with the skate club, that every kid got a rose, but nobody got to give any flowers until they got outside. And it's a little thing, but it makes a difference for the child that's kind of going, hey, I skated and I got nothing. So it goes from the little things to potentially really larger activities of how do you keep people from, disengaging a whole other group of people. One of the more interesting ones we had actually when I was in Oklahoma had to do with baseball. We'd have the big trophy for the first place team, and like it or not, it was starting to get out of hand with the parents and everything else. We ended up changing that to a point. We still had the trophies. We weren't trying to get away from competition, but what we did do is we had a sportsmanship trophy. And so the goal for every team was not only to see if you could win the tournament, but also to end up with the sportsmanship trophy, which was no coach could vote for themselves. It was all required that the parents were appropriate and supportive of not only their team, but the other teams too. And we're just trying to build a better understanding of what's going on with the kids. And we're trying to build skill base here. We're trying to build self-esteem. How do we do that and not tear it down with heckling. That doesn't do anybody any good. Leave that for Major League. We don't need it in kids sports. When I first became involved, it wasn't that long after the National Recreation Association had combined with a number of other groups, and the NRPA became the umbrella for, the national park groups and the state park groups and recreation groups and park groups and educators and therapeutic rec. And so NRPA pulled all those in. We ended up with a fairly large board of trustees to make sure that we had all that representation. Plus, being a nonprofit, we had to have more citizen members than we did professional members. But then we also wanted to kind of keep that regional focus. So the board got very large, obviously. We had 71 people who were sitting at a table trying to make decisions about where NRPA was going and what we were doing. And I was actually chair of Constitution and Bylaws when we kind of said, we really got to take a look at this, because we had, at that time, aquatics wanted to be its own section. We had another one that wanted to be seniors, and the thought was, wait a minute, that should be represented under APRS. And we went, if we do that, then it's not just adding one more person, it's adding two, because it's citizen. So all of a sudden, we were blooming up into 75 and we went, ooh, we have to really look at this. And so I believe there was kind of a task force that was formed, and they really looked at it and kind of went, we've got to find a way to get this smaller. My personal feeling is that might have gone a little too far because we lost some of that regional representation, or that opportunity for a lot of the professionals to kind of move up and be recognized on more of a national level. But I think we've lost some of that synergy that happened because of the ability for those professionals to meet together. I think NRPA has to reach out to try to do some of that. Now, whether or not regional, by region, whether that's a good idea, I don't know that that's required. I think a lot of our professionals kind of look at themselves based on what they do, whether it's aquatics or parks or that sort of thing. So it may be that you start to build more of a grassroots through the states, but I think there's some opportunity to maybe try to rebuild that a bit, give people a reason for being able to meet together and start to resolve some issues that they may have in their local community, or how do we move park and recreation forward to the forefront, particularly for some of the smaller communities or park and rec departments. I'm not sure sometimes the politicians always understand what those parks and programs actually bring to a community. I went through some of that in Oklahoma. At one point, our council had wanted us to do a substantial fee increase for our adult softball program. And at the time I was talking with them, I said, I understand your concern, and we have steadily increased the fees because we do believe that the adults can afford to pay for these. But you can't double that fee in a year. That will end the program. And so what we did is we went back and surveyed a lot of our players on how much do you spend on pizza, how much do you spend on ball equipment, how much do you spend on this, and brought that back to them at a council meeting and said, you can do this, but this is $1 million that you are literally ending because of basically canceling softball. And I said, and that's not multipliers, that's direct costs that they are doing. So if you're going to do it, call the pizza place, let them know they should lay somebody off. Call the sports place, tell them they probably should lay somebody off, etc. Because that is direct cost, that's direct money that's going. The plus side was that everybody kind of went, oh, that's kind of a bad idea. Let's make that work. We actually ended up doing a similar thing on the parks because a couple of our council members wanted to sell some of the parks that they thought just weren't being used. We had too many. And we sat down and walked through with them, what is important to you in a park? Is it programs? Is it visibility? Is it that has a playground? What are the reasons that people come? And you guys help us determine what the value of that is. We'll put it in a matrix, and then we'll determine what parks potentially would be the first to sell. The interesting part of that was our one council member who wanted to sell the parks, the one across the street from him, was one of the first to go. That was the end of the conversation from that point on. But it was putting it in a matrix that they could see and understand, and they were the ones who chose what those values were. So we put it back on them to understand what the value of those things were. And it's important not only to remind people of that, but then you got to go back into some very tangible things of trying to get those personal stories of people who, why do you go to a park, and what is the reason you do that, and what is it that you in your livelihood, and why does that balance? So if you get enough of those to take back to a council meeting, it starts to gel a little bit more. You're determining what is important, and that's what you should be supporting. And you should be building your budgets based on what the people want, not on what you think they want. But if you get a tangible reason for why, most people are pretty excited about doing it. As I became a director, and part of that was my first director was very good about being involved in knowing who his legislators were and going to Springfield. And I learned that you just have to really make sure that you're in tune with those people who are either in the state or in the federal offices to be able to tell them what it is you're doing and why you're doing it. The plus side was to build a relationship with them, and sometimes we talk about a legislation and it goes, I'm going to tell you it's not going to happen. Okay, well, that's good. I would rather know that we're not going to get to move on that, but it doesn't mean that it might not come back again at another time, but have enough rapport with those people that you can get kind of the truth out of them of what can I expect and what can I not expect? What can we do, or what would it take to change some people's minds? If you're going to help move the needle, you got to be involved. And so that was part of the process.